For just decades, our industry is focused on person-centered care, and I'm in love with person-centered care. However, you can't achieve person-centered care unless you're interested in other persons. You can't just you can't just focus on that in a vacuum.
Sure.
If you want to improve anybody's life, the implementer has to get something for it.
Welcome to IDD Leader, where human services leaders grow their impact, lead with heart, and build the workplaces our field deserves. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Are you tired of just hearing a bunch of noise and somebody's good idea but has no evidence to back it when it comes to solving workforce challenges? Well, today's conversation is definitely for you. It's with Dr. Mike Strouse. He's the CEO at GoodLife Innovations, and he and his organization have been literally innovating for the past 30 years. I'm talking they were doing remote supports before YouTube existed or iPhones, back when you had to go to Blockbuster to watch your videos. But they didn't just have one good idea or one innovation back then. They've continued innovating. And in this conversation today, he's going to share the model that they use that has had dramatically good results with their workforce and outstanding outcomes for the clients. And I'll tell you right now, some of what he's going to share is not what you'd expect. And it's not just your typical advice when it comes to staff turnover and workforce development. So you will need to buckle up. This is part 1 of 2. Enjoy today's conversation. Before we get into introductions, let me start with this. Many providers believe that high turnover, high vacancies, and high overtime costs are pretty much like the norm. There's nothing to do to avoid those. But your team has achieved the opposite, and you've even helped others to do the same. Is this really predictably achievable?
It is, and especially if you're working with providers that have similar problems with each other. Yeah, if they're delivering services in similar ways and they have similar problems, then the outcomes are pretty predictable. Yeah.
Wow, I can't wait to dive into that here in just a few minutes. But first, why don't you introduce yourself, your role at GoodLife, and maybe share also what drew you into this work in the first place? Like, why do you care so deeply, or what's keeping you in it?
Well, first of all, I've been doing it a long time, Nate. So I am celebrating my 40th year at GoodLife as a CEO.
Wow, congrats.
Yeah. And a little bit longer than that, also as faculty at the University of Kansas Department of Applied Behavioral Science. So my background is a behavioral analyst, but kind of a certain brand of behavioral analyst. I'm a systems guy. So, my focus is on developing and implementing, models of care, service models. And I'd like to say, the next generation of service models is what we've always worked on. So that's kind of what I do with the university. We have a 50-year partnership with the University of Applied Behavioral Science, and we have probably 10 to 15 graduate students, postgraduate students working with us pretty much weekly now.
Wow.
And have had for years. So we've benefited from that, which is an enormous benefit. And I know you a bit, Nate, and I know that, being evidence-based is important. And if you're a behavioralist, that's how you believe you should be, is, we should not just be anecdotal, but we should actually do something that improves services in some measurable way, and that's been a guide point for me for a long time. But I'm Mike Strouse. I've been doing this for a long time. The work that I do at GoodLife is always sort of where we demonstrate what we do and sort of work on the systems of how we improve labor and other models that we work on, different systems that we work on. And then when it works, we often evaluate it and sometimes, many times, publish it as well. And then at some point in time, we add it to our bag of tricks, and then we nationally, which is the other part of our mission, is we help other agencies, implement, what we do. And in the process of helping other agencies do that, we also learn from them things that we bring back to our group that we find interesting. And but again, even if it's learning things anecdotally, at the end of the day, we try them out, and we measure them and see if we can, add them to our packages that we do. So, you know, improving workforces, I'm sure there's not many. There's some silver bullets, not many.
Yeah.
Mostly it's a combination of million. We always talk about a million paper cuts, but there's also a million band-aids that we put together
Okay.
that can improve people's lives. And then once you get them all together, you find out, okay, that it's more of a system, it's more of a process. But there's all different parts of the elephant we try to improve, so that it works better. So yeah, that's what we do.
So, just to kind of, I guess, summarize or clarify, you not only have an agency that's providing services to adults with intellectual disability, but you also then, with this partnership with the university, has kind of, I think maybe, I don't know if I read this in something you wrote or if this was in a previous conversation, but it's almost created like a lab type setting
It
that you
is.
can try things out at the with this research backing, and to really look at the data, the nuts and bolts of all of it, to then develop systems which then you can that you have started to see that replicating across other providers, right? Because there's also um, GoodLifeU. Is that the extension
That
of?
GoodLifeU is
Explain
the
that.
outreach. It's the outreach portion. It kind of combines our university and Good Life professional infrastructure to help other places. And I'd say since COVID, we've worked in 20 states or more, working with providers to help them improve the staff stability. Um, and we have some kind of growing. I mean, and by the way, doing that much, I'd definitely say it's definitely somewhere between 1.5 to 2 billion dollars of payroll that we've worked with. I mean,
Wow.
it's getting to be a pretty big body of work.
Wow.
Um, and we're seeing some pretty consistent results, and we kind of know also when it's not going to work. So uh, and I don't think it doesn't work. I think the setting conditions have to be right, and there's different. We work in the area of schedule pay and those kind of systems, but there are different types of agencies. Some do what I call continuous care models, and some are what I call fractional care, where you get 3 hours here, 5 hours there, and they're very different approaches. You do those things very differently. Um, but we're getting some good results, but you have to make sure you understand, what agency you're working with, and use the right tools for the right job, those sorts of things. But it's really, honestly, it's incredibly gratifying work because people, as you know, have battled um, this problem for years. And I love irony, but as a behavioral analyst, I'm into systems, but I'm into human behavior. and
Okay.
and it's just so interesting to see people have similar problems and always do the same thing across the country. It's really true. The problems and the way people approach them are very similar, and it's really kind of human behavior that they do it that way. And we can get into that discussion later, but it's just really interesting. And then you talk to them about how you could do it differently. But you remember that old adage that if you do the same thing, and expect different results, then, that's kind of the definition of insanity. And,
Yeah.
and you see that in our industry, especially as it applies to staffing and how people approach it. They do the same thing. And even when they want different results, they still tend to do the same thing. And they need kind of a coach to help, and a good, plan
Sure.
to help them get to the other side. But when they do, it can be life-changing for them. And we've had the most fun thing in the whole world is when you've changed, the very nature, and had an agency go from so significant problems to really feeling like they are made a huge difference. And that
Hmm.
there's nothing better than that because, the reason we're doing this is, we changed our mission a long time ago. It used to be, and by the way, we use the word meaningful differences in honor of Dr. Todd Risley, but
Hmm.
in our mission, but our mission was to make a meaningful difference in the everyday lives of people who need help to live independently. That was our original mission. And then we added one phrase after that because it was really important and it was our belief. And the thing we added was, and those who make it possible. So the reality is you have to, in order to provide a good life for the people we support, we have to provide a good life to the people who make that possible.
Hmm.
And our industry, I'm a big person-centered guy. I've literally led in the closure of 7 institutions in my day.
Hmm. Wow.
Don't do that anymore, but that was, I did that. And the point is that, people, have been migrating to community services and more independence and those sorts of things, but for just decades, our industry is focused on person-centered care, and I'm in love with person-centered care. However, you can't achieve person-centered care unless you're interested in other persons. You can't just you can't just focus on that in a vacuum.
Sure.
If you want to improve anybody's life, the implementer has to get something for it.
Hmm.
And we don't focus on that in our industry very much.
Hmm.
And, lining up people's goals and giving a good life to the people that make it possible, that's something that we put in our mission, and we measure it. We have 7 things we work on to improve the lives of the DSPs, and, we measure them. Um, and we change our models so that we kinda get win-win arrangements.
Okay.
But and that's not what the only thing we do, of course. I mean, but you gotta work on that.
Well, I certainly think so. That's part of why this podcast exists, or
Yeah,
primarily
I
why this
bet you
podcast
do.
exists.
Yeah.
So I certainly believe that. Um, I can't wait to get into some of the mechanics of this. But maybe one of the better ways to do that is if we start kind of with this. Let's suppose I'm a director at an IDD provider. Maybe there's, I don't know, 100 people being served, a couple hundred employees, some res, maybe someday, or some vocational. So it's kind of got this blend of different programs or services provided. And my agency's been struggling for years with the same stuff. We're just hitting the national average. We got 40% ish turnover. We're kind of this chronic last bit of vacancies we can never seem to get down to, below 10%. It's always somewhere a little bit above that. And I come to you, I say, listen, Mike, we've tried everything, but nothing sticks. What's the first thing you're going to tell me?
Well, I like to learn a little bit about the agency, and I usually do that along with my presentations, but I go across the country at conferences normally or virtual conferences as well. And I present our model to them. We call it Workforce 101 is the basic, sort of the low-hanging fruit model for continuous care. So the first questions I ask them is, you know, I have to learn enough about their agency to know what tools might apply to helping them. So, and people like to talk about their agency, and I like to learn about it. So, most of the stuff that I do, and I would do with you, is I would ask you about your agency, who you serve, do you, what's your, because, it varies so much, Nate. Some people are in group homes, some people are in 3-person living arrangements, some people are doing in-home care, some of it's fractional, some of it's continuous. Sometimes they do residential care, but they don't do day services. Sometimes they do residential care and they do day services. And sometimes, in South Dakota, 90% of the people who are in the residential program attend their own day services because it's often kind of, they're smaller towns, or they may be, the only provider in the area. So it's that way. So I have to know who they are and how they deliver care enough. So I probably spend 10 minutes asking them about their program. But at the end of the day, most of the and I work with agencies from, I don't know, 5 million to 150 million annual budget is in that range. So it's not like small or large, but it's kind of all over the place. But most full service agencies or bigger agencies or even medium sized agencies do both residential and day services. And then I also ask them, how they do night support. Do they have up at night or do they sleep? Or, I try to find out enough about them to know that. And then, of course, I ask them about the metrics. And I do this, as you know, as kind of a behaviorist. I can recite to you for 30 minutes the metrics of good life. I really can. Um, but a lot of agencies is more anecdotal.
Mhm.
And what I try to find out is what level of detail do they really know? For example, I would ask them, do you know how many openings you have? Trust me, a lot of people don't.
Hmm.
Um, do they have specific schedules or do the schedules change? What I look at like how many part-time and full-time people. As you know, Nate, there's national averages on that. I think it's 68%, 69% full-time, 31% part-time is the national average. I ask about that. I try to get an understanding. Like some people will say, we have 50% part-time. I'm telling you, the percentage of part-time is creeping up and up and up and up
Hmm.
nationally. And part of it is because home size is getting smaller, more fractional care. Um, so many things are happening. So I try to understand them. After that, I have usually a pretty good idea of, you know, can we help them? And most of the time that's a yes. And if so, what what's the approach? We're going to talk about fractional care. We're going to talk about continuous care. I like to work on continuous care first because people understand it best. It's low hanging fruit, and we have really really good results without as much change with
Hmm.
continuous care. Then I work on fractional care after that because having a good system for your continuous care improves our ability to do the fractional care, which is another story. But so after I understand them and I figure out, what they do, most of the time I'll work on, the continuous care programs. This would be and some agencies will have a group home. Some agencies will have 3-person homes. Some will have other size and different methods for day services. So I get to the bottom of all of that. Once I get to the bottom of all that, we have a pretty prescriptive process about how we go through to help people. But, there are some things, for example, that we've learned through lots of work that are we know we can help. And
Can
like
you like an
90,
example?
yeah, 90% or more of the agencies that come into our help group use 5-day work weeks. We are, as a country, and living in a time where almost every agency that we work with, a high proportion of it, more than you would think, are doing 5-day work weeks. And it's like that old country song, uh, 9 to 5 kind of a thing. You got 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7, and that's kind of the mentality of that. We've done lots of, the beauty of doing a lot of research with lots of different people across 3 decades is you learn some facts.
Yeah.
One of the facts that we know is that if you take a 5-day work week, people working 40 hours as in the care industry, and if you only look at those 5-day work week people who are working 40 hours, 3 shifts, 2 shifts, 3 shifts, any of that, you will find that across 4 or 6 pay periods, they will average 32 hours of work. They're hired for 40 and they'll work 32 hours, plus or minus an hour. Now,
How does that work? Play that. I mean, explain that.
well, we have learned as an agency the best data that we can get into to kind of forensically look at people is payroll data because it's mostly pretty sophisticated. I mean, the payroll packages, people, it's better than most HRSs. I steer more into payroll than I do the other, but but you will easily be able to take 4 or 5 pay periods of 1 or 2-week pay periods. If it's 2-week pay periods, 3 is enough. But you are hired to work 40 hours and you're working 32. And this includes the people who I call sort of the heat-seeking missile overtime people. There's that group. There's a group that calls off, and then there's a
Okay.
group that kind of works their schedule. But when you put it all together, it's averaging about that. And there's reasons for it. It's like, well, 5-day work weeks have a higher reliance on PTO, and that's true. There's a higher call off. There's other kinds of things associated with it. Well, in 2001, we started working on 3-day work weeks. That's a long time ago. We adopted this, and we don't do one type of schedule. We do, we call it 5 faucets, but we have multiple schedules, but a primary schedule, that what we call our base schedule for shift style work, which we prefer other than shift style work generally. But if you're doing shift work, which most people do, we like one of the first 2 layers to be 1 or 2 layers to be 3-day work weeks. We have a certain brand that we've developed all across. We call it the front half, back half work week. It's probably more than we can get into too deeply. But at the end of the day, we have a front half 3-day work week, a back half 3-day work week, night and day. So look at 4 squares, if
Okay.
conceptually.
Sure.
And what I can tell you is that a 3-day work week is hired to work 36 hours a week, and they're working 41. A 5-day work week is hired to work 5 days a week, 40 hours, and they're working 32. Just that one piece of data is important. And the other issue is a 5-day work week does not pick up full additional shifts very often. What they'll do, Nate, is, if they work till 3, they'll say, well, I can work to 7, but I can't work any longer than that. So now you fractured a shift, and now you got to figure out, how am I going to backfill that last part of it, which
Hmm.
then ends up explaining why managers have to backfill so many shifts. That's one of the reasons. Or, and people don't talk about this, but there's a phenomena, I'll call it, and I don't know that we invented it, but we've looked at it probably the longest of anybody in the country, and that is a thing called schedule migration. I will honestly say the most challenging issue that affects our nation in the care industry is the reliance on 5-day work weeks and consequentially what I will call schedule migration.
Can you define that?
Yeah. So if you have schedules that are of unequal appeal,
Oh,
when a schedule opens up that is a preferred schedule, you don't fill that from the outside.
no, I see exactly where you're
You
headed
fill
with
it from the
this.
inside. And so at the end of the day, what happens is the least preferred schedules are what you offer to the public to hire people at beginning wages. And another thing that happens in addition to that is at some point in time, you get vacancies to the point where, let's say you have 20% vacancies, 25%, and it's not uncommon
Absolutely.
at all. You get to a certain point, and then there's a perseveration on the stairs, understandably so. But the managers can't afford anybody else to leave. And when they perseverate on the stairs, then what that means is a stayer would say, I can't work on Saturday. I can work on these days, but I can't work on those days. And then all of a sudden, because of the vacancies and a variety of factors, you're starting to say, well, if that's all you can do, that's fine. I'll take it. Have you ever played that game? I wish I knew what to call it, but you see these little squares where it has like numbers in it or letters in it. You move it with the open square and you move things around and you spell
I know
words, or
exactly. Yeah, I know what you're
you know what
talking
I'm
about.
talking about?
I sure
Well,
do.
think of that vacancy. You have to have a vacancy in order to move things around. But what happens is people are taking all those preferred things and the open things become less preferred. So a combination of what I call schedule migration, which everybody moves to the preferred schedules, combined with sort of being so incredibly focused on the stayers at the expense of the vacancies who literally have no vote. you create this, the human nature that I see all across the country is you create this situation where the openings are becoming less and less attractive, more fractured, more part time, and people keep pushing the long term staff to weekdays. And this, then they start inventing things with great names like Weekend Warrior and other kinds of things. And that shouldn't be up like, I know that some people really like that, but it's not necessarily your friend because part-time positions open twice as often and for twice as long. And if they're on the weekend, you ask any manager anywhere what they hate most, and they will tell you weekends. So there's this evolution driven by sort of human nature and by one other factor. I'm not hoping I'm not, being too wordy here, but the other factor is they also allow the managers to make the schedules. And it sounds reasonable, right?
Yeah, because like, oh well, you're gonna have to manage whatever you create. You're gonna bake your
Yeah,
cake. You're gonna eat it too.
but that does two things. It makes all the homes uniquely different because every manager is doing their own thing. And secondly, the staff know the manager can change the schedule. And there's an enormous amount of pressure to do that. And so all of a sudden you have all of this uniqueness in the agency and just sort of wonky openings. And I used to tell people, I said, well, how, the first thing I'll ask, and you ask the first thing, and literally the first thing I ask everybody that I work with, I said, could you please either show me, if you can, the openings that you have? Some agencies are pretty specific. Here's the openings and how long they've been open. Some agencies can't even tell me what the openings are because it's so dynamic. But at the end of the day, you can kind of determine here's the openings, and they're crappy openings, and they may be open for 6 months to over a year. And I used to tell people, if you have openings that's open for a year, that is like starting with a schedule that would be like telling you, go make a home schedule, but you don't even need to do anything more than 90% of the positions. Just 10% don't even put a schedule in. And they look at you and say, well, that's crazy. Of course, we do 24/7 schedule. Of course, we have to have a schedule. And you, well, you don't have to because you can't fill it.
You haven't for the last year.
Oh, and now your baseline is a minus 10% of the things, even at your best case scenario, because those are unfillable positions. And then I'll ask them how many people applied for your positions. So the two questions I do is I look at their schedules that they have open, and then I ask them how many people are applying for it and how many people do you hire. I just look at the pipeline. And
This is
and it's very forensic work. But what I love about it is when you get the answers that you usually get, like a couple of people a week or even down to a couple of people a month, then I say, okay, how many people leave? Because, they don't always like put all these numbers together. And I said, if I'm averaging, 5 people leaving a month and 2 people hiring a month, or 25 people leaving and 16 hiring, I have found that you don't get into a bucket overnight. You get it in a bucket because you're a -1 every week. And across time, it gets to that point where like, this is tolerable. And then it gets to this point where it's just completely, you know, intolerable. And then they scallop and do whatever they have to do. And it's just this constant back and forth like this on that, if they can ever catch up.
a
So
vicious. It's a vicious
it's
cycle. Yeah.
interesting. It is a vicious one, but it is driven by human nature. The human nature of you're responding to your employees and trying to respond to them. You've probably heard all there's different phases across time. And if you worked as long as I have, you've seen them. In care industry, it was a weekend warrior or, different kinds of models that kind of throw themselves. So the idea on the weekend warrior is it made the Monday through Friday people happy, but they never were happy because the weekend warriors never existed. You know, they were on paper, but they never. So nobody ended up being happy. But if you were happy at the front end think it was a great idea.
Yeah.
And then there's other things that's happened, where they try different things. One of what was kind of like the McDonald's or the approach where, or certain industries have said, work whatever you want, work whatever you want. And if you don't care how many different people are involved in care or what kind of gaps you have, it might be helpful, but it doesn't really work in continuous care models. One piece of data, in that long question by this, the one data as a behavioral analyst I keep my eyes on more than any other metric ever, other than pipeline. I look at pipeline, people coming in and people going out. That's
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
big data. The only other one that really is the most important is the number of different people involved in care over time. I don't focus on turnover. I don't. And I think turnover takes care of itself. There's a reason I don't focus on turnover. I might have talked to you about this before, but I found out by accident across many, many years that turnover is inversely related to openings. I mean, that was like eye-opening to me. For example,
Do
if you look at
explain. Yes.
yeah, in the national data, it's true. You can see there's a third of the workforce that turns over every 6 months of the people who leave. There's the early turnover is the most significant turnover,
Absolutely. Yep.
but there's also a third of the workforce that exists and maintains itself who are 3 years plus. So what happens? It's weird. Let's say you have wonky schedules and the openings are wonky, okay? They're crazy schedules that are open. Migration, all that sort of stuff I just described. It creates this system where the openings that are on the front end for newbies are crappy schedules.
Yeah.
That drives turnover on the front end and lowers the applicants on the pipeline because nobody wants a bad schedule. So they're not applying. You end up providing care stably. Not fun, but I'm just saying you don't have a lot of turnover because the people who've been there for 3 years plus or 2 years plus are not turning over.
Mhm.
Those people are not turning over. So what affects the metric of turnover if you don't have anybody applying and you're missing the front part of the high turnover? What you're left with is a stable people and a lot of openings.
Yes.
So the metric of turnover is not a good metric for agencies that have a lot of openings. Let me give you the inverse of that. Why I focus on the number of different people involved in care. And here's why. Everything you do can affect that. Your openings will increase the number of people involved in care. Your call-offs will increase the number of people involved in care. How you replace people, how you fill shifts will increase the number of different people involved in care. Your reliance on a high percentage of part-time will increase the number of different people involved in care. And there's
Mhm.
one thing I can tell you that's absolutely true. As the number of different people involved in care over time goes up, care quality goes down every time.
Absolutely. And that yes, absolutely.
But what's cool about looking at the number of people involved in care is you can do so many different things to affect it. So it's one scale to step on, number of people involved in care, but you can work on PTO strategy. You can work on replacement staffing strategy. You can work on call-offs. You can work getting rid of the part-time caregivers and going more to full-time caregivers. There's so many different things you can do that will affect that one metric uh, uh, well.
And so that's where you aim your energies then?
That's
As
what
a
I mean, that's one of the major things I look at to see if I've done a good job. Example, a 3-day work week that we just talked about. If you look at the typical agency that has just on some outcomes, you look at the typical agency that has national average, 69% full-time, 31% part-time, guarantee you most of the ones that come up with those numbers are 5-day work week agencies. So they have, that's what generates the part-time. And they have openings and they have all of those things going for it. So you look at those metrics and I know I can put I if I can eliminate or reduce the number of part-time and improve the full-time, and our system does, the front half, back half, day and night system will reduce, like we're at Good Life, our average is 98% full-time. The agencies that we work with aren't achieving that, but they're rarely under 90%. So, you know, just that alone reduces your workforce by 15%. The number of people you need to hire to deliver the same ratios of care by that. So, and that's a positive thing. The other thing is, the way the front half, back half works, it's either a Sunday and 2 days out of a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Saturday and 2 days out of a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Front half, back half, day and night. So that's everybody has a weekend day, and everybody has 2 weeks. We also have some pay things related to that, what's called premium pay for the weekend. We do a lot of things on stuff, but that model puts schedules very equal. They're very equal. And what we can't equate by just their layout. Everybody's got a weekend. You got either 3 or 4 days off in a row. That means that you're working 13 days a month and you're off 17 days a month. You are off 7 months a year,
Yeah.
but working full time.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is, you have this because of that. Because you're only working 13 days a week. And by the way, I told you this isn't the only staffing pattern we use. We use others, but because you're only
This is
working
one
13,
faucet, right?
it's one faucet.
You said 5, but keep going on this one. Yeah, yeah.
But because you're only working 13 days off and you're off 17, you only have to work 2 extra days shifts a month to average 41 hours a week. So even if you're averaging 41 hours a week, working 15 days and off 15 days, that's a pretty balanced life. When you are off, I always give this analogy. When you are working a 5-day work week, you're off 2 days organically a week times 52 weeks a year. That's 104 days off before you give any PTOs. And if you're really generous, let's be really generous and give people 30 PTO days off. That's a lot, but I see it.
6 weeks. Sure.
I call
Okay.
that self-inflicted wounds, by the way. Because the more you give off, it sounds good, but you have to replace them. And then what I find out is the agencies don't replace them. They encourage them to work, or they won't give them their vacation days, and then they pay them. And as a behavioralist, I say, well, how often do you pay them for those vacations? Well, usually once or twice a year around Christmas, or like twice a year, we'll just pay them for the days we can't give them. And as a behavioralist, I can say, well, that's fine, but it really won't affect anybody's behavior other than those 2 times.
Right.
If you really want to affect behavior, give them that extra money in their salary,
Yeah.
where it can do that. But my point is, in a 3-day work week, so if you did 30 days off and 104 days off for 2 days a week, that's 100. It could be as much as 140 days off if you're being overly generous with everything. Well, okay, a 3-day work week has 208 days off before you even give anything. So it's about life balance. Really, when you're off 3 and 4 days a week, 3 days in a row, always, sometimes 4 days in a row, but always 4 days a week, you can get a lot of your stuff done in that amount of time without it infecting work. You got only 3 days of childcare. You only got 3 trips to work. You got a lot of time on your hands to do the things that compete with work. I always tell people, if you had another job, or if you had, college or whatever, you have ways to do it. And the way we do it, Nate, is the back half and the front half of the workforce can trade at will, because it doesn't increase the number of people involved in care. They
No,
can
it
trade.
wouldn't. It wouldn't at all. You're right.
If you need flexibility, trade, and they do all the time. The only thing they won't trade is weekends, because we pay time and a half for weekends. It's called premium pay. So
Let me interject here for a second. This You probably know this, but when I ask people, and I do this all the time on the podcast, and then a lot of conversations that aren't on the podcast too, about addressing turnover. So far, you're the only one who's kind of first talking about scheduling
Yeah.
as
You know,
the.
my analogy on that though is that, Nate, I have one for everything.
I'm ready.
It's this: we are in love with training. We're just, I mean, look, I'm a behavioralist. You know me. I love training. Training is good. But it's like, can you really train somebody to like a bad date?
There it
You
is.
know,
Okay, there.
and that's kind of like what we have. It's like, if you have crappy schedules, what are you going to train them to do? You're going to train them to appreciate a crappy schedule?
It's profound. I mean, it's my mind. There's a lot of connections going off right now. Even what you're saying about the migration, it's almost like if you have a membership business and you're not getting enough new members, but all of your focus is on your current members, you've kind of doomed yourself to just eventually fizzle out the business model would just simply fizzle out. You have to have, it's like if you're going, things are going south and you stop your marketing budget. Well, that just means for sure you're not going to exist in a couple years.
It
But
does, but that's a couple of years. And see, you're a behavioralist too. I know that. And you know there's a difference between delayed
it is, it's
consequences and
delayed.
current ones.
It's delayed.
We're, as human nature, we're driven to maintain anything right now at the expense of something later.
Goodness. And the faithful few will be praising you the whole way because now they've got their best schedule that they've ever had.
But they never can do it.
But they can't even do it. But it's
But
going to
they're
be
going to
getting
praise me.
short-term reinforcement nonstop. I mean,
It's all about that. If you're, I'm a big behavioral fan, but, and I don't talk behavioral, but
yeah,
human nature is human nature, and it's like you see it and you can predict what they're going to say before they say it. And it's not being arrogant. It's just that when you see it this many
sure.
times and you know why they're doing it, you know what they're going to say. You know what they're going to say, and you know what they're going to do. And it makes fixing it fun because they go through this disbelief, but when they hear what I'm talking about, they do get it.
Yeah,
They do get it.
it's not conceptually difficult.
No, but you're in the mirror of it, and you're in the weeds of it. And I think when you put it all together, you get, like in that 101 that I do, it's an hour and a half. And by the end of it, you kind of see people going, that's pretty much what we do. Yeah, and they all agree they need to change. But then that's the problem, because they can agree that if we don't change, we won't survive. But it's also human nature to be frightened to change. And that's why I don't mind sharing all this IP with anybody that will listen. I don't care. It's on our website. I've written about it. We've published on this stuff. It doesn't matter because they can't do it without help. They need help. You can't. There are simple ways to get through it that doesn't cause problems. The number one question after I do this presentation with people,
Yeah, tell me.
same
Yes.
everywhere. It's, I love what you're saying. I know we need to do it, but I can't afford to do something like this and have all my staff leave. They were frightened,
Protecting the faithful few, even just in the way they're
even at that point. And
conceptualizing it.
that's where I have to tell them. And eventually what I realized, my own self, is that I didn't do, we had to make changes ourselves in how we presented this, because the truth of the matter, they're really only get less frightened about doing this when they talk to other agencies that's gone through it, not me.
That have gone, yeah, not you,
Yeah.
but the other
Yeah. So,
agencies that were sitting in their exact shoes.
yeah. So, like today, right before this, we did a virtual presentation with like 30 potential new customers that were kind of, yeah, but I'm worried. We brought in an agency that had gone through it, and we just put the floor to them and say, what questions do you have? And it was really cool because, the agency, by the way, right now today, there are about 5 or 6 agencies that we've gone through within the last 2 years that have no openings. Now I have to qualify that because we have a system where since we have that standardized model, we put a layer of replacement staff on top of it to work the exact same schedules. And between the replacement layer and the layer that works in the program, they cancel about 90% of the vacancies out. It's a technology that we've been doing for 10 years. And it's really, I always ask people, how do you fill shifts that are open? How do you do it? They always, again, I ask them, but they almost always say the same thing, which is I get existing staff to work more. And I have substitutes that come in, and substitutes is code for people who quit that can work when they want to work. And they don't. And they don't. And then when I can't get either of those things to be true, then I have my managers work.
Yeah, the supervisors just step in and cover it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how they do it. And if you're really in trouble, if you're really in trouble, you get a pool staff to come in. And that's when you ought to know you're in real trouble. Because pool staff, I'm not saying anything disparaging about it, but the reality is you get a dependency on that, and you actually lose people who end up coming back to you in a different way that you're paying a third more. Then your
Paying so
limited
much more.
resources it's almost predatorial at some point in time when they do that. So anyway, go through all of that, and it's kind of all predictable stuff.
So I was very excited to have you on this on the show today because when I first was introduced to, like, I don't know if we'll call it your material or the models that you guys are using, the models you guys are using, it's it then and still does to me. It feels absolutely game changing. I mean, or the potential to be completely game changing. That the kinds of stuff that can get solved, but going about it from a different angle than what, I mean, if
human nature would
what
do
human nature would
what
do,
human nature would do.
and literally what pretty much anything that if you start Googling it, you start researching it. Well,
No,
I don't mean in peer reviewed journals. I just mean if you're starting to like look things up or even look at like the conference sessions that deal with turnover.
it's all the time cultural. It's feel good stuff, which is not unimportant.
Right?
It is important, but it doesn't make it not a bad date.
That's the thing. I mean, this is like
You got to start with, I think the basic thing is you got to make it a better arrangement for everybody.
wow, wow, wow. It was hard to even hit pause to interrupt that conversation partway through. But don't worry, the next part's coming out a week from when this releases, and if you're listening to this more than a week afterwards, it's already there for you. So you'll definitely want to catch the second half of what Dr. Mike Strouse shares. But I always try to leave you with something actionable that you could do right away. Here's what I want to share for today's episode. Think for a moment if you're trying to get your new hires to get that worst schedule that he was talking about. And think about how transformative the process of recruiting new staff would be if you could have a highly appealing schedule for them. It's really something to think about. Just try that on for a minute. Sit with it for a moment. And then by all means, check out his website, which is linked in the show notes below. Also, if you enjoy getting great tips and insights and even keeping up with all the latest guests that we have on this show, a couple things. First of all, you can hit subscribe on a podcast player or on YouTube. You can also sign up for our emails, which we highlight the show, and we also just share different cool insights and different things. Even as I'm learning, I just love sharing what I'm learning with you as well. And you can do that by just going to iddleader.com and scroll down to the bottom, and there's a spot to sign up for the newsletter. Or better yet, if you want to get a free PDF guide that talks about some supervisor habits that help to reduce turnover, you can also just go to iddleader.com/supervisor and pick that up for free and join the mailing list that way. All right. Well, what I got to say is I can't wait for next week. But until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.